Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to do a book review. The classic War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I have the Penguin edition here. This one has an introduction by the sci-fi writer Brian Aldiss. So I'd read this book, I think maybe when I was a teenager, but I decided to go back and revisit this classic. And the opening lines are very famous, and I think I'll just read those. So the first chapter is called The Eve of the War. No one would have believed in the last years of the 19th century that this world was being watched keenly and closely by intelligences greater than man's and yet as mortal as his own. That as men busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. With infinite complacency, men went to and fro over this globe about their little affairs, serene in their assurance of their empire over matter. So, that opening passage, this novel published 1898, right towards the end of the Victorian era, and at least looking back at that time period, you think of it as being this very confident time period where there had been this long period, relative period of peace, faith in technology, faith in institutions, just a very optimistic way of looking into the future. And I feel like that opening passage where Wells is sort of saying, like, you're maybe too confident, like things, there are greater things in this world type of idea. So, and that's such a recurring thread throughout the novel, is about the hubris of humanity and how quickly that hubris can be shattered when it encounters something much more powerful than itself. And that's a great theme running through it. So the novel's told in the first person, and we never actually get the name of the narrator, other than that he's an educated man. I believe he's a philosopher of some sort. So, but he's also knowledgeable of the sciences. So the narrator is a good mouthpiece for Wells, who was this figure who was interested in both the arts, the humanities, and the sciences. So we kind of get a stand-in for Wells as the narrator of the story. Just a very brief plot synopsis. Basically, the novel starts out there. They observe lights coming down from the sky, falling stars, I believe they call them. They discover these cylinders all over that are buried into the earth, that come out of the earth, and we quickly discover that these are not of Earth, that it's determined that these are Martians, and they quickly begin destroying, opening up a path of destruction on London. And this is the story itself is very much centered around London. There's a lot of place names, and I'm sure if you went to England, you could follow the journey of the narrator as he has to flee his home, gets separated from his wife, and has to find out a way to survive as things get worse and worse, as they have the ability to destroy buildings, and later the Martians, their actual agenda is even more nefarious as we go further along in the novel. So it's really written like a diary throughout, where the narrator is recounting these events shortly after they happened. There's one of the big things in this book is, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is how quickly society can fall apart. And what's interesting to read this is that this is before electricity was wide in use, and we're still in a very 19th century world. But how quickly things can get disrupted in a civilization that's close to oil in modernity, getting close to modernity, where food supplies shut down, logistical supplies shut down. There's people are driven from their homes. You have a refugee crisis in England, and really what this looks like, and really what the whole book read like to me, it's a premonition of modern war, is what we're seeing here, which adds this very grim layer to the book, where clearly air power was just around the corner, would come a few years later, and clearly if you have air power, you can use it for military purposes, to drop bombs on people and cities and things like that. And so I have to think Wells is really thinking about that aspect of it. What would a modern war look like? And his description is fairly accurate here. People have to leave their homes. Resources become very limited. Civilization starts to break down. So if you look at the course, especially the Second World War, we see so many examples of this. So this book is kind of an eerie premonition of as the narrator just observes people losing their minds, or just becoming more like animalistic, strictly in survivor mode. I mean, this is quite common. We're used to dystopian stories these days, but I had to think in the late 19th century, this would have felt even more unnerving in some ways than it does today, but that's hard to say. I think also in the book too, there's a lot in here about, I think religion is a theme in the book, and at one point the narrator is with a curate, a religious, someone in the clergy, and he quickly grows disenchanted with this person he's kind of surviving with for a while. And it's almost as if what is happening is so out of the curate's worldview. It doesn't match at all with his very Christian worldview. And what happens? He goes crazy. He goes completely mad because something totally irrational is happening that's antithetical to the way he sees the world. So there's a little bit of that in here. There's also, I think, the Martians themselves, as we learn later in the book, that they thirst for human blood. They're not only taking resources, but they live on human blood. And I think, like the Martians, once again, a premonition of what humanity could become. I mean, the Martians are a high-tech civilization, but they use their technology to help them survive, and there's really no morality there. It's all about, we'll use our technology to survive, even if it means, destroying people, destroying civilizations. That's what they'll do. So clearly there's, I think, a lot of commentary on colonialism there that Wells is commenting upon, about the British Empire and what the other European countries were doing. So it's easy to read this book, I think, as an allegory of colonialism is interesting too. Also, towards the end of the book, the narrator is with this a soldier in the army he kind of starts to work with for a while, and we kind of get this idea of society going mad, where this artillery man is already thinking about the post-Martian world, and how, what do I have to do to survive, to live in this system where clearly I'll have no power, but I'm going to do everything we can to survive. And if that means, becoming slaves to the Martians or whatever, we'll do it. So it's almost like, and he's talking about civilization might have to move to living underground, living in the tunnel systems below London, and that's how we'll survive and flourish. So it reminded me of Dr. Strangelove a little bit. At the end of that movie, there's this absurd discussion about a post-nuclear war world and survival, and I felt like this character in the book was a good symbol of society going mad and things like that. things like that. But really, this book, reading at this time, like I said, it feels like a war diary. It's like you're reading a war diary, and it's such a prescient book about what warfare would become, and also that it's from the point of view of a civilian and what modern war would look like for civilians who are simply caught up in the crossfires of the conflict and things like that. So yeah, and yeah, important book. Just an important book. A lot of novels definitely ran with this, and of course this, I just talked in a previous video about the 1953 version. There's the famous Orson Welles radio play in 1938, I think, 1939, which played upon war anxieties of the late 1930s, and also other versions of the story, most famously Steven Spielberg's 2005 version, which I think the Spielberg version really gets onto that idea of society breaking down and how it's humans start to treat each other worse than what the actual Martians are doing. The Martians are just acting on their biology, you might say, but humans are kind of being reduced to throwing all their values, all their morals away in order for survival to take place. So in that sense, yeah, it's a prescient novel in that sense. So yeah, those are some thoughts on The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.